Welcome to this first SailPoint and exclusive webinar. We do have two panelists from SailPoint in the call. I propose that they present shortly themselves before we kick off the presentation, and as said, don't hesitate to ask questions and to make it as interactive as possible session for today. Jack, perhaps you can start with presenting yourself.
Hello, thank you for joining again, and sorry for the issues we had last week. Really appreciate that you take the time. My name is Jack Swinkels. I am based out of the Netherlands, worked 6 years at SailPoint, and I'm responsible for the channel in a couple of countries, including Belgium and Luxembourg.
Okay, great. Thanks,
you.
Jack.
Yeah.
And again, welcome everyone to the second attempt at this webinar. My name is Mark Oldroyd. I'm going to be doing most of the presenting today. I have been at SailPoint for just over 9 years now, and mostly in partner-facing roles. So my speciality area is technical enablement, technical training of our partner community, and I focus on the pre-sales aspects of SailPoint selling. So making sure that you as an organization, as a partner, fully understand the technology that we have, the different ways we can position that, even down to demonstration techniques and things we can do to advance the technical sale with a customer. So I'm going to be taking you through a presentation today. And let me just make sure I can see my screen. We're going to talk through maybe a slightly different approach to discussing SailPoint and identity governance. It may be different to what you've seen in the past. We're not going to focus too much on the technology. What we're going to talk about really is more of the, sorry, I'm just going to turn off my webcam because it looks like I'm getting a slow connection message on there. But what we're going to talk about really is more around some of the business challenges that we see with our prospects and our customers. Some of the ways that identity governance can specifically address some of those challenges, and some of the benefits of using this approach and this kind of technology. So I'm going to take you through all of that. So we'll talk about generally something called the identity cube, which if you've heard much about SailPoint, you'll begin to understand what that is. That is a way that we record user information and governance information. But we'll touch on that a little bit more as we go through. I will talk about the technology at the end of the presentation. I'll also touch on some of the things that are available to you as a partner as well. So, you know, some of the tools and facilities that SailPoint offer through exclusive. So let's kind of jump into the session. As Ingrid said, if there are any questions, then please feel free to fire those off as we go through. So let's start right at the business problem, and let's have a look at some of the things that traditionally we see in organizations. And here we've got a typical example. New salesperson arrives in the organization, new sales rep. We need to quickly determine what applications and data this person will need access to in order to perform his selling function. And that could be relatively straightforward. You know, we see on the screen there, he needs access to Salesforce, the commissioning system, and the HR application. And that's relatively easy for us to understand which applications are involved. Not always. Some companies even struggle with understanding that high level requirement for a user. But here we know what applications the user needs. What happens in many organizations might be all kinds of processes around making this access happen for this person. Quite often we see cloning exercises, which really means as an example, IT is told to provision access for this new sales rep. One of the things they might do is go along to look for an existing user that they believe is similar to this person and effectively clone or copy the access that that existing user already has. That's a fast way of setting up the the accounts and the access for this new sales rep. And that clearly has the potential to increase the risk of unnecessary or inappropriate access to information. But the real way we need to approach this is to actually look at what access does this user need? What is their business role, their context? And inside these systems, what do they really need to be able to do? This particular new guy is based in the UK, so he should only be able to see inside Salesforce the UK and the EMEA level information. He should only be able to look at contacts and create deals. Because of his job function, that is all we want this person to do. And similarly, in the commissioning tool, he should be able to view his own commission. We don't want him to be able to calculate or approve commissions, etc. That might be breaking some of our regulatory requirements, Sarbanes-Oxley regulations and things like that. So, and finally, he should be able to see his pay and benefits in the company HR system, but he should not have access to any kind of payroll processing in that system. Now, these are what we call entitlements and permissions inside these applications. And again, what we need to think about is how do we determine those requirements from day one for this new user? And we'll think about that in a second. Now, what happens typically, maybe 6 months later, maybe a year later, he's doing really well at his job. He's promoted to the EMEA sales manager, looking after the European Middle East region. What happens in each of the systems here? We now need to change his permissions. He should be able to calculate and approve commissions in the commissioning system. He should have access to more data inside Salesforce, potentially more sensitive information about deal sizes in multiple countries. And he should be able to influence more processing and activities in the HR system related to his team that he looks after. So, he's still got access to sensitive resources. We've got to be very careful about what he can do in this case. The problem then gets worse if potentially he moves out of the sales team. Another year later, he likes the IT aspect of things. He begins to move into an IT focused role. And what we have to think about is when we see that event, that change in business context, we need to modify the access that this user has. So we don't want him to be able to see sensitive data in Salesforce anymore. We don't want him to be able to approve commissions. He's no longer in that team. So, if we do that correctly, then that is great. And not many organizations are actually doing that correctly. What they tend to do is simply add more access to users. And users may well retain some of the sensitive access they already had. Now, that can be seen as an oversight. It doesn't really affect the user, but it could cause harm to the company. If, for example, someone else gets access to his account, or he decides that he wants to take information maliciously from the company, then we are, by doing this, we're actually increasing the risk to the organization. And identity governance is what we typically use to control all of this. It's about making sure that each person has access only to what they need to do their job, and minimizing the risk to the organization through breaches or regulatory violations. And that's really what we're trying to do with all of the SailPoint technologies and the capabilities that we have. Now, if we don't do that correctly, then you begin to see very quickly the results of that, what happens. And there's lots of evidence about what is actually happening in the world right now. If you look at the number of breaches, certainly last year in 2020, there were just over 37 billion customer records, data records were exposed onto the internet, and that was up from the previous year. That was about 8 billion exposed records. So this is hugely on the increase, and even this year we've seen some huge breaches, and the numbers are even bigger this year. But that's looking at the situation globally. What this means to an individual company is a typical breach is around 26,000 records, according to an IBM security report from last year. 26,000 records. Typically, there's a cost associated with each of those breached records. So a typical breach could be somewhere between $3.5 and $4 million for an individual organization per breach. So what we're talking about here is a huge amount of impact to a typical organization. Now, the really interesting thing about this, when you begin to look at those breaches and you look at the cause and what facilitated that breach, you find that quite a high level, somewhere between 25 and 30% of these breaches are directly related to individual user accounts inside organizations. There's obviously a large number of breaches are, breaking in through websites and, vulnerabilities and cross-site issues and things like that. But 25 to 30% of the breaches are directly related to user accounts. And what does that mean? That means that an external attacker has potentially got access to an internal account. They've used phishing, they've used other compromised technologies and approaches, and they've managed to get the credentials of a user account. When they go into that user account and they begin looking around the different access that user holds, they suddenly find they've got access to more than they expected, sensitive data, different applications and services. That could well be a result of bad identity governance. If we're not minimizing the access all the time that these users need, if we're allowing them to have access that is no longer applicable to them, we're actually making this breach risk much higher. If any of our employees get attacked and become vulnerable, we're making life easier for the attacker. And there's lots of studies around that. So that is what we're trying to do all the time, is manage that risk within an organization. And this problem is only getting bigger, as most of you know. This will become more and more important and more prevalent over the coming years. So that's kind of the impact to the organization. But there are other things happening at the same time within today's organizations. There's lots of general IT and business trends that we're seeing around the world, and there's constant challenge and constant change that's being generated from both the business and the technology worlds. And many of you may well be involved in these programs with your customers, working on these kind of initiatives and supporting them through these initiatives. And these initiatives could be anything. They could be related to the way we interact with our customers, our markets, our business partners. They could be protecting organizations against cyber threats, dealing with incidents, and many other things that we're seeing on there. And I'm pretty sure if we did an audience poll now, we might get a whole set of different results of which of these are important, or indeed what other programs and challenges are people seeing. So there's basically a lot of activity going on. And we'll talk about some of these a little bit later on, things like cloud transformation and some of the other things, and the impact that those have, and how we can help to address some of those things. But really, coupled with that, we see all these business challenges and technical challenges that are happening. That is having a direct result on the IT environments in our customers, in typical organizations. The result of business change is that usually more technology is being added into the infrastructure on top of what they already have. Okay, older applications, chances are there's a program of replacing and refreshing that technology. Quite often that involves moving to the cloud and adopting different consumption models for our applications. You know, and we see those changes in most organizations, things like ServiceNow and Salesforce being adopted in favor instead of on-premise solutions. And we also see organizations moving their compute platforms into service providers, things like AWS and the Google Cloud Platform, and even Azure as well. That obviously the technology is changing, but you know, these apps, these applications, these services still need to be governed and managed. And in addition to that, we need to be able to quickly bring these applications into production and support this transformation that the business is demanding. And we're just talking about applications there. The same is happening in the unstructured data world, files and you know, and unstructured content that is being stored traditionally on-premise in file shares. Now it's all sitting in the cloud in things like Dropbox and OneDrive and SharePoint Online. The problem is the same there, that we see that sort of huge expansion of information that is moving into the cloud. So we've got that technology change that's happening. On top of this, as we've said already at the beginning, we've got our user population that is, you know, new people joining the company, people moving around, changing job functions, and then leaving the organization as well. And you know, we can accelerate some of that if we're working in a company that is acquiring other companies, or you know, breaking apart, divesting different parts of the organization. That leads to huge changes in the user population that we have to deal with. So there's a lot of things that, you know, the IT departments and the business in general is having to deal with all the time. And if we start to combine all of that, you know, this suddenly becomes a very complex, moving environment. If we don't manage this effectively and we don't look at how the users are interacting with all this technology and the change that's happening, we could massively increase the risk in our organization. We could be leaving people with too much access to sensitive information, and obviously, you know, growing the risk within the company. So we have to have a way of supporting all these changes and technological impacts within our organization while still maintaining the appropriate risk level for our users, and keeping up with all of that risk that's happening. And the answer really, from SailPoint's perspective, is this, what we call the identity cube. And we'll talk about this a little bit more, but it's all about understanding the changing user population, the access those users hold, the services that are available to those users, and what they need as a minimum and maximum to perform their job function. And that, if we have that in place, that really gives us a foundation for managing and supporting all of this change, and it allows us to adapt quickly, but maintain that control and maintain the risk level around our information. And so hopefully you'll see that as we go through that the presentation as well. Now, that sounds great, building that foundation, but you know, there are some things we have to do to actually make that happen, and we have to start on this journey right at the beginning, and really to understand this and to try and build something that can support our risk reduction exercises. We need to think about these basic things. So, you know, what do we need to understand in order to get control of our environment and start moving towards this identity governance journey? Well, first of all, we need to understand where the sensitive data is in the organization. Where is the real critical data that we need to protect, that, you know, has commercial value or or legal value. It could be our database of customer information. It could be our financial data. Each company is unique in what they term as their sensitive information. So we need to understand where that is. If we don't know where it is, then we can't really protect it. The second thing we need to think about is who currently has access to our systems. And this is really a complex question, or a set of questions that we need to answer. First of all, we need to understand who are the users in our organization. Who are the employees, the contractors? If we've exposed our systems to external business partners, we need to understand those people as well. And we need to start to formulate this record of all these individual people within the company, what we call insiders within the company. We need to understand their business context as well. What role do they play in the organization? Where do they work? Where are they located? What's their job function? Where are they in the reporting structure of the company? That is all the business context that we need. And then finally, we can actually address the problem of what access do they have? Which applications and services are they currently able to access? And what rights and permissions and privileges do they have inside each of those applications? That's a critical question. Again, without being able to answer that, it's very difficult for us to get any kind of control. We need this visibility information. Once we can address that question, the next thing that we really want to start doing is asking, is the access appropriate for these users? And we'll touch on that a little bit later as we go through the presentation. There are lots of tools and mechanisms that we can use here that actually start to validate, are my users accessing the right kind of information? Do they have the right kind of access to perform their job function? And again, this is all about minimizing the access that users have. We only want them to have the access that is relevant to their business context, something we call least privilege, okay? Minimizing their privileges to the least amount possible. And then finally, the last question, once we've answered all of those three questions and we've got control of the environment, then perhaps we can start to think about how users are actually using the applications we've given to them. Are we seeing the right kind of behavioral patterns? Are they doing the right kind of things? Are they using the right transaction flow within the applications? And again, this is a more of a longer term view. It's more advanced, but once we get to this point, we can start tracking activity of users and really deciding, are we seeing potentially a breach in action? If we see inappropriate types of activity within a particular account, that could be a breach that we've detected that's actually in play right now. But again, it is fairly advanced, but this is really what we're trying to address with identity governance. Now, it may or may not sound easy to answer these questions, depending how large or how complex your organization is. But there are some steps that we can go through to actually start to get this control within our organization. And what we're talking about here is going back to this concept of the identity cube, building the cube based on all the information that we can access within the organization. Building the cube is the foundation to being able to answer all of those questions. So what we do, and again, this is effectively what SailPoint technologies are doing once we deploy them into a customer environment. The first thing we're doing is obviously beginning this discovery process around the users themselves. So organizations will have user information resident in the HR systems. They could be in the cloud, they could be on premise, they could be in bespoke databases. We see all kinds of things out there, but typically the connectivity doesn't represent the problem here. It's actually understanding where the data is being held and what kind of data we're holding in those repositories. So we begin to connect to those systems that hold that HR information. We extract elements of that data for each of the people in the company, and we use it to construct what we call the first face of the cube. Okay, so we create a cube for each user. We begin to populate that cube with our chosen information. It could be the job title, department, management structure, unique personnel numbers and identifiers. That kind of information is what we're looking to collect here, and we use that to begin the creation of the cube. Now, there could be challenges even at this stage, because things like temporary workers, contract workers, they may not actually be held in a suitable repository within the company. So there could be some process issues that we have to deal with at this phase. That's not really a technology issue. It's more about understanding the way the company operates and trying to identify where that data can be found. But we are now beginning the process of building the cubes. We have a set of cubes, one for every user that we found, and we're beginning to populate it with some of that business context information. What we then need to do is enhance the content of the cube by what we call aggregating the accounts and the permissions held by users across the IT infrastructure. And this process really involves building connections into multiple different systems and services. Again, they could be on-premise, they could be in the cloud, they could be custom applications, they could be managed services that we're using. But we need to build a connection into those systems, start collecting access data, accounts, and the access that those accounts have, and correlating it or matching it back to the cubes that we already know about. And this is, as you can see, we're adding data to the cube as we go. The result of this process means that we can now see some of the business applications that this user has access to, and we know the level of access they have within that business application. And again, connectivity here is critical to making this work. We need to be able to quickly connect to these applications, pull that data in, merge it into the cube structure, and start to build up that picture as fast as possible. So that's one aspect of what we need to do, looking at the business applications and business accounts. I mentioned this earlier around unstructured data. This is another area where we can start looking for access information, looking at the data that each user has access to. Collaborative solutions, things like OneDrive and SharePoint and Box and Dropbox, plus regular server-based storage, on-premise SharePoint farms and things like that. They're all great sources of information. Again, we need to understand what the user has access to, which files and folders they can touch. And at this point, we also begin to look at the sensitivity of that data. So we're running classification. We're looking at the content of that unstructured data and figuring out, does it contain credit card information or personal information about customers, for example. All that information goes back onto the cubes to really enhance the picture of user access that we have. And then finally, the last stage of this, where we can get a lot more complex, is beginning to look at the security infrastructure that we're running. And this is another angle to all of the different access that a user has. Things like privileged account management solutions, the contents of your single sign-on launchpad, even going into non-user accounts, things like robotic accounts and software agents and service accounts. All of that is information. It's not directly related to users, but it is related to identities. Our automated bot processors still have an identity and they still have access to our systems. So we want to try and build all of that in here as well. When we get to that point, what we've now got is visibility across the entire IT landscape. And we've got this foundation that I talked about sitting in the cubes, which is being constantly refreshed and updated based on the changes that are happening in the environment. So that really gives us the starting point for all of this, the cube repository, as we call it. And that means we can begin to address some of those questions that I mentioned earlier. What access do people have? It is very visible from the identity cubes that we've built, and the other questions we can begin to tackle through some of the mechanisms that we have. And that really means once we've got that cube repository in place, it is a very fast process to move into what we call the regulation and compliance aspects of this. So in other words, testing and validating that our users have the correct access. That's the stage we're at now. So we can use the analytics and reporting tools. We can begin to use things like access certification. Now, if you haven't come across certification, that is really the process where we take the information that's sitting in the cubes, we convert it or translate it into a business language that our business users can understand, and we present it to those business users. And ultimately what we want to see perhaps application owners or business managers, team supervisors, etc., in the business validating the access that their users have. So, that is those people, those managers, those process owners, those application owners, they are the ones that really understand the business activity, what access people need, and also what those people are doing in terms of the business activities. So they are the ones that can make the decision about, is access correct for this user? This is not an IT decision. This has to be a business decision. Access certifications is a way of providing all that information to the business users so they can approve or remove access as they go through each of these users. Now, certifications is one, it's a very important part of this. Maybe in a future session we can dig into that in a little bit more detail, and I can show you some examples of that. But there are other things we can do in here as well. Policy enforcement, looking for conflicting access. And there's many examples of this. The one I always use is a typical accountancy policy, or what we call a separation of duty. I do not want people in my company who can create supplier records in the financial system and then generate a payment to that same supplier, all in the same transaction. That potentially opens things up for fraud. And that's a really simple example, but there are many of those. And most organizations, most CISOs, will probably have a set of policies that they would like to enforce, but they do not have a platform or a way of doing it, primarily because they don't have visibility of all the users and the access they have. So with this, we can actually begin to enforce those kind of policies. Is there a question? I think maybe someone had a question. No. So policy enforcement is important, and again, the ability to do that across the full infrastructure, across all applications. So if you have capability X in an application over on one side, you should not have capability Y in a separate application. So we can do that sort of high level application-based policy checking, but also we can go deep into applications like SAP and other complex environments and actually perform deep policy checking inside those systems. So there are multiple levels of policy enforcement we can begin to implement here. Some of the other things we've talked about: sensitive content recognition, making sure we understand that sensitive data and protect it correctly. And we can also begin to get more advanced in the way we are doing these kind of things, looking at roles, business roles, collecting together common access for different types of users, and started to build that into role catalogs. So all of those things are relatively easy for us to implement once we have this identity cube system in place. The other thing that we can also do very quickly is around efficiency and automation. So we can begin to look at how long it takes to onboard a new user. What access does a user need from day one? What is typical access for that type of business activity? And we can start to automate many of these processes, reduce the amount of administration tasks and changes that are going into the IT team, introduce self-service, things, basic things like password self-service resets, starting to remove huge amounts of administrative tasks from the help desk. So all of these things are really starting to help not only speed up the processes in the company, but also minimize the risk to data exposure. So we're constantly applying this least privilege principle that I talked about. So those things are very quick to actually begin to automate, things like our joiners, movers, and leavers processing. But going back to the Identity Cube warehouse, one of the things that we can start to do is get a little bit smarter about how we manage this information we're building in the cube warehouse, in the repository. So if we begin to look at all of these cubes, they at first look, they all look very similar. These are cubes representing individual business unit users. They have sets of access that are highlighted in the cubes. They all look pretty similar to us. Now, that's not always the case. If we think every user is the same and we try to build policies at that very high level and deal with all users in the same way, then we begin to miss something. That's not really addressing the problems around risk that we may have in the company. What we need to do is actually start to look at those cubes a little bit closer, and maybe they're not entirely the same. Maybe there's some variation in the access that people have based on geography, based on the job function, even based on the customers or the markets that they look after. And the more you look at this and the more you dig into the cubes, you'll begin to see that these cubes are very different. So there are some people in the organization who have the potential to impact the risk profile of the organization. They have access to sensitive data. They have conflicting access to different business processes, and they can affect the stability of the company in different ways. Those two examples, sensitive data and toxic combinations of access, are really the main things that we see here. And what we're really doing is identifying the areas where we need to focus our attention. So the red cubes on here, the ones that have the potential to increase the risk profile of the company, or maybe they've got top conflicting access that they haven't even used. They may not even realize they've got conflicting access. They still represent a risk if they were breached, if they were phished and attacked from an external attacker. So what we can do is we can get really smart with this, and we can begin to apply artificial intelligence techniques, machine learning techniques, to start to analyze all of these cubes, look at the commonalities, look at the similar characteristics, and really start to break down cubes based on the level of risk that we can see within these individual users. And this is not a static process. As things change, users will suddenly get different access, they will change job function, things will happen to them, and we've got to constantly reassess and reevaluate where they are in terms of their risk level. And this is a really simple example. It's showing 3 different peer groups, as we call them, groups of common users that share some sort of characteristic. Now, the way that we do this in SailPoint with artificial intelligence, we don't influence this grouping in any way. We put all of the cubes into the AI technology. We use a series of algorithms, and basically over time, it begins to recognize what these different groups are, and they're constantly changing as the software reevaluates everything. But ultimately, what we're looking for are these guys, what we call these outliers. So people that have very different access to the rest of the population. They're very unique in some way. They could be an influencer. They could have the ability to give other people access rights. They could have toxic combinations that are outstanding. There could be many reasons why these guys are very different and therefore represent high risk to the company. Those are the people, the cubes, that we really need to focus on, and put those through various processes to make sure that we fully understand the risk that they present and remove as much of that risk as possible. Once we do that, the outliers will begin to move back into the individual peer groups. They'll become like other users, and they'll find their natural grouping. So what we're looking to do really is manage all this access kind of at the group level. And this naturally links back to business roles and the way we sort of define our roles moving forward. So that's an area that we've been doing a lot of work on. That technology is available, and we've got customers starting to use that kind of approach, really on top of the things that we've talked about already today. Now, going back to some of those challenges, we can actually use the identity cube and even the AI technology, the peer group analysis techniques. We can begin to use that approach to satisfy some of these challenges that companies are seeing. And one of them that I wanted to call out specifically was what we can do around threat detection and response. And again, this is usually quite a complex mechanism in most organizations. It typically involves lots of different technology. It usually sits within the security operations area of the IT infrastructure. So quite often, this process involves collecting huge amounts of log data, looking for exceptional activities across the network or across different applications, and trying to pull all that information together. And as many of you will probably recognize, this is a huge growth area. It's becoming increasingly more difficult to really identify problem areas in this kind of arena. There's huge amounts of information that has to be processed. There's the problem of false positives and really detecting the actual problems within the company. So this is quite a complex area. But again, the cube, the identity cube that we're building, can start to help address some of these challenges. What we have within the cube is all the valuable business context information that we've built up, and also a complete view of the user's access, which applications they can touch, what level of access they have in that application, what business roles have been assigned to that user. All of that information is sitting in the cube. And what we see is, we're working with a lot of technology partners already. They see the value of enriching their security alerts with this information that's sitting in the cube. Just simply adding things like the user's location and job functions into security incidents, putting that business context data into the security incident when it's identified would certainly help us to maybe remove false positives and perform further validations. So we can, by augmenting the incidents with business context data, linking back to the user that's involved in this, not just the account that was involved, but the user themselves, we can actually make better decisions inside our security mechanism. And we can also begin to use the cube and the supporting infrastructure that we've built in SailPoint to deal with some of these incidents. So, for example, when we do find a true problem within the detection, we've detected a threat. The response could be, we need to disable the user access for that particular user. We can see there's been an attempt at a breach, the first thing we need to do is quarantine that user, close down their Active Directory account, shut down their access to sensitive data, do as much of that as possible. Again, the cube can help us do that. Using SailPoint, we can address all the applications a user has. We can disable them, shut down their access to various network equipment and applications and services, turn off their CyberArk access, for example, and do all of that in real time based on the detection of that threat. So there's a lot of things we can do here, using that sort of infrastructure to integrate into our processes, our orchestration processes, etc. And again, another similar situation here is around Agile Workforce, and we've seen this over the last year. The requirement for organizations to quickly enable people to work remotely, which in many cases involves new technologies, provisioning access to things like Zoom and Teams and those kind of facilities. And again, we can do that very quickly with this cube infrastructure. We can apply changes across large numbers of cubes. For example, we can simply add Zoom into a standard business role that is assigned to many, many different cubes. That will cause the provisioning, the automatic creation of accounts for those users in that infrastructure. And actually, we saw that with one of our customers. We work a lot with a lot of the big global advisory firms. Most of them are actually customers of SailPoint. One of them, we saw a rollout of Microsoft Teams to 225,000 employees globally, and that was almost done in a matter of days when they decided they needed to perform that rollout. So that was all done using the SailPoint infrastructure to do that, and the cube was the driving force behind all of that. So again, we can actually start to really tackle some of those challenges. And the last one I want to touch on, given the time, is around digital transformation. And again, everybody is seeing this in all markets now. The initiative of digital or cloud transformation, moving. Well, it actually takes many different forms, but one of them could be moving your compute platforms from on-premise data centers into cloud-based infrastructures with things like Azure and AWS and GCP. Again, these are large-scale projects. You really need to think about the access of users into those environments as you're moving these platforms into the cloud. And it becomes particularly important when you're looking at the way that these platforms secure access. So things like Amazon Web Services, for example, has a very complex permission model and account model within that environment, even down to the ability to have dynamic, almost script-based or program-based access that is evaluated in real time. So it's what you find in those environments. It's very easy if people have inappropriate access and the ability to change access rights, then very quickly you could see all of your data exposed, almost in the blink of an eye. And we've seen some large-scale breaches where that has happened. People have made changes to policies, and that applies globally across the infrastructure, and suddenly all your Amazon S3 storage buckets containing sensitive data are now public. And that does happen in those environments. So again, the cube can help us to address some of that. And using some of the tools that SailPoint has, we can begin to really manage those environments much, much better. And similarly, when we're doing transformations to things like Office 365, we're moving our service catalog to ServiceNow, for example, or we're looking at a very complex transformation, something like SAP ECC to S/4HANA migrations. These are all things that we can use the SailPoint environment, the cube, we can put in the connectors to the old and the new system, and we can use the cubes to slowly provision access for the relevant users and maintain that control. What we don't want to do is replicate the access we have in our on-premise SAP system, throw it all into the brand new S/4HANA system in the cloud, and expect everything to be secure and protected. The chances are that is not going to give us the most optimum security model. So we can use the cube, the connectivity that we have, the processes and mechanisms and automation that we have to facilitate that transformation in a nice, low risk, controlled fashion. And it's all really down to having that cube information available to us.
Mark, there is just 5 minutes left, so maybe you can also open it up to questions.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Jack. We're kind of on the last slide now, so that's good timing. I didn't want to talk about too much about the technology available through SailPoint. This is the only technology slide we really have. A lot of what we've talked about in the early stage of the presentation really sits on the top line of what we call the capabilities here. So the whole collective ability of SailPoint is known as identity security. This is the identity security framework. Within that framework, we have individual capabilities that customers can buy and combine to make their solution. The top row of capabilities you see there are typically delivered by our Identity IQ or Identity Now technology platforms. So those are our core platforms, our core technologies that really, the first half of the presentation where we talked about building the cubes, performing all the compliance, regulatory controls, policy checking, and automation of join and move a lever processes, that is all based on the capabilities of the top line. What we can then do as we start to move into some of these more advanced areas is we can start to add on these extension capabilities. Now, that includes things like the artificial intelligence capabilities. It also includes specific components that can extend the reach of SailPoint into your cloud platforms, your unstructured data, etc., as we've talked about. And we even have capabilities such as SaaS management, which allows us to discover applications that are being used in the company that maybe IT doesn't even know about. So that increasingly large number of shadow applications that the business are procuring, we can now discover them, bring them into the governance framework, add them into the cube, and begin to understand how they're used correctly. So I think that's really all I wanted to cover. I don't know if there are any questions that anyone has.
I haven't seen any specific question written down, but perhaps we can open it and see if any attendee has any question or any comment. It seems quiet on that side. You must have been crystal clear.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe I can say something if there are no questions. So is it still true that what you typed, Ingrid, is the case?
Yeah.
Okay. So I see that all the attendees are still with Proximus, which is great because we are doing a lot of work with Bart Nagels and Bart Collins and others to start working with you. I think we have the first real project at our hands, so that's great. Maybe also there is potentially there are still a lot of questions from you guys on certain topics that we potentially now have addressed. And what we did is we tried to address really the business reasons why this should be on your attention, and not in the technical deep matter. of course, we can do on all these different subjects that are here on this slide. We can do this in depth. So if there is any need for a specific topic, please don't hesitate and connect with us via exclusive or direct, because we have also a direct connection with you guys. A couple of final words on SailPoint. SailPoint is about 15 years in this, let's say, governance area. And there are companies who are trying to eat part of our cheese, or think that they can eat part of our cheese. And that's very good that they try to do that. But there are also things that they can say, yes, we can cover everything. For example, with Azure AD. Yes, that's partly true on, for example, some of the provisioning actions, that kind of thing. But definitely not on the fine-grained governance that SailPoint is doing. And that's where we have, also a cooperation with Microsoft, but sometimes individual sales guys or individual pre-sales guy see sometimes different things. So that's something that I would like to mention to you guys. Really, if you look into where SailPoint is very good at, is that we put everything in business context, meaning that especially for the people, for example, a requester or somebody who needs to approve or deny a request, they need exactly to know what they want and what they need to approve. So business context is very, very important. The other interesting thing is that we also are very heavily working on things, and it's already active and live, that we try also the business user, try to keep out of the SailPoint application. And the reason for that is that when you consider that you are a user and that you need to request access to an application or part of an application, you probably don't do that in a daily manner, meaning that you do that once in a quarter or once in a half year or maybe once a year. And that we use, for example, Teams and Slack and ServiceNow as the, let's say, the portal where you can request that, and also where the manager will have the ability to, when that request flows through the SailPoint application and does all the checks, as Mark just mentioned before, and then the approval will get a message into Teams or in Slack or in ServiceNow, so that you guys don't need to be in this application. So what we also do, and this is also different to others, that we make the life of the business user easier, but also that it's really taken care of, and that, and I give you another example why we make this easier. That, for example, an approver does not need to go in a deep technical session in this application. That's really where we are making the difference. And of course, the last part that I want to mention is we can deliver this as a full multi-tenant cloud environment. And that's also a very big differentiator, because there are companies that can deliver it in a cloud, but it's just a managed service with a wrap around it. And SailPoint is the only one who can do this in a full multi-tenant cloud. It's in an AWS environment, highly, highly, highly secure. And the final piece is really the connectivity, because connectivity means connection to application, but also extended functionality to, for example, ServiceNow, or to CyberArk, or to, for example, Palo Alto Cortex, and many, many others. That's where we put a lot of, money and effort to make that happen. And that's a little bit the overview of who SailPoint is. And we have local presence, of course, with the distribution of exclusive networks and people in Belgium.
Thank you, Jack. Just last, if there is any comment or any question. Nothing on that side. So I think then we can close this session. I want to thank you for your time And feel free to come back to us for anything that you would like to hear, to know, and to understand. Mark, Jack, see you soon. Have a nice day and happy selling.
And thank you very much for opening up this platform, and thank you very much for the attendees to come here.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks everyone for listening.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, bye for now.
Bye-bye. Bye.